This man is about to die. To protect his father, he was forced to betray Lalo, opening the door for the assassins. Then Nacho fled desperately, hearing gunshots not far away. He thought Lalo had died. Little did he know, Lalo single-handedly wiped out the entire assassination team. To stay alive, Nacho kept running desperately until dawn. Seeing someone approaching in the distance, Nacho hurriedly hid. This was Salamanca territory, and being seen by anyone would be extremely dangerous. Just when Nacho was relieved that he hadn't been discovered, his phone suddenly rang. Luckily, it was on vibrate, but one guy seemed to notice something. Nacho quickly took out his phone and hung up. After the group left, Nacho received the call again. The call was from Gus's man, aiming to get Nacho out of the country. Nacho asked if Lalo was dead. The other side confirmed he was dead. Nacho then inquired about the innocent people. The caller said they didn't know and told Nacho to continue north. He was arranging a hiding place for Nacho and would contact him in an hour. Nacho guessed that those innocent people had probably been killed too, but he could do nothing about it. Filled with guilt, he continued his desperate escape. Meanwhile, the surviving Lalo arrived at a farmer's house. The hostess, Sylvia, treated Lalo like a benefactor. From their conversation, it was revealed that Lalo had supported them and even helped the host, Mateo, see a dentist. However, they didn't know that Lalo never did anything without a reason. Lalo joked that Mateo's scruffy beard didn't look good, so Sylvia told Mateo to shave it off quickly. Taking advantage of Sylvia's distraction, Lalo picked up the scissors on the table. Although there was no direct scene of Lalo killing, his intention was clear. Lalo then went to the bathroom. When Mateo finished shaving and looked up, he realized they looked exactly alike. Clearly, this man was Lalo's stand-in. Lalo had arranged for Mateo to see a dentist so that others would think Mateo was Lalo. A few hours later, the Salamanca family's courtyard was filled with corpses, and the police were investigating the crime scene. The cousins, upon hearing about the family tragedy, arrived immediately. Seeing the charred body of their brother, Lalo, Marco took off his suit and covered him, placing the family's death god card on top. The two showed angry eyes, determined to avenge their dead family. However, they didn't know that the charred body was Lalo's double. Soon, Gus received a call from his superior, Juan, who informed him about the attack on the Salamancas. Gus feigned ignorance and even expressed curiosity about who could be behind such a brutal move. Juan wasn't sure who sent the attackers, but they had already confirmed that Nacho was the mole. A bounty has now been placed on the fugitive Nacho. Once Nacho is found, the mastermind behind him will also be interrogated. Juan cautioned Gus to be careful in business, worried that their operations might be affected. After hanging up, Gus questioned Tyrus about the mercenaries being wiped out and whether the mission to assassinate Lalo could still be completed. Tyrus didn't answer. Mike noted that such things had happened before. Mike volunteered to bring Nacho back safely, but Gus remained silent. Mike suspected that Gus had some unspeakable secrets. Seeing that the next topic involved critical issues, Tyrus tactfully stepped aside. Once Tyrus had retreated, Gus asked Mike to share his thoughts. Mike said that Nacho had fought a tough battle for him and seemed to respect him. Gus was well aware of Mike's intentions, which were to get Nacho out of danger as soon as possible. That night, Nacho followed Gus's instructions and arrived at a motel. In the prepared room, there was an envelope on the bed containing some cash and a gun. Nacho then contacted Gus's man. The other party said that someone would come to meet him in a few days, and Nacho was told to hide here for a few days, not to be discovered, and if anyone came in, he should shoot to defend himself. The next day, an incognito Lalo prepared to smuggle himself across the border to seek revenge on Gus. After paying a $2,000 fare, he was signaled to get in the car. At that moment, Lalo suddenly thought of Hector in the nursing home, so he asked the driver when they would depart. Then Lalo called Hector. Hector, who had just learned about the destruction of their base, was immersed in deep pain and sorrow. Hearing Lalo's voice, his expression immediately brightened. Lalo told his uncle about his plan to seek revenge on Gus. However, Hector rang his bell frantically in protest, seemingly wanting to tell Lalo something. So, Lalo patiently had Hector spell it out letter by letter. Eventually, Hector conveyed that Lalo should find evidence. Lalo said he had no evidence. Previously, he had followed Gus's men in the north for several months without noticing anything unusual. At that moment, he suddenly remembered the German engineer Werner's team, so Lalo decided to use this as a breakthrough to find evidence in Germany. Lalo told the driver that he had changed his itinerary and asked for a refund of his fare, but his attitude was as tough as ever.
There's no refunds, asshole.
I told you. Be nice.
However, they didn't realize they had provoked the wrong person. After a few gunshots outside the car, Lalo opened the hidden door of the truck. He told the stowaways they would change vehicles and refunded their fares. Although Lalo had just shown his ruthless side, he quickly displayed a gentlemanly demeanor, making the audience both love and hate him. So, the question is, do you like Lalo or hate him?
Lalo Salamanca lives.
Will Gus always stay one step ahead, or will the ruthless killer Lalo outmaneuver him? After watching this episode, you'll be captivated by their intense showdown, with Gus's hired assassination team completely wiped out, and Tyrus receiving information that the mercenaries completed the mission. Gus couldn't help but feel something was amiss. To prove to Gus that Lalo was indeed dead, Tyrus even obtained photos from the crime scene. Although Lalo's body was burned beyond recognition, the dental records in the autopsy report confirmed Lalo's identity. Faced with such strong evidence, the cautious Gus still had his doubts. He asked Tyrus how the fire started, and Tyrus said the report said it was caused by a cooker. They speculated that someone must have been cooking at the time. However, they didn't know that all of this was part of Lalo's plan to fake his death, aiming to make Gus drop his guard so he could deliver a fatal blow later. But Lalo underestimated Gus's capabilities. To confirm whether Lalo was truly dead, Gus thought of a plan. He called his superior, Juan, and said he had a way to maintain peace between them and the Salamancas. They then went to the nursing home where Hector stayed. Juan urged Hector to accept Gus's condolences. Although Hector knew that Gus was the mastermind behind the attack, he held back and listened to what they had to say, because before this, Lalo had secretly contacted Hector, telling him that he was hiding and seeking evidence for revenge. Juan said they were helping to find the traitor, Nacho. During this time, Gus watched Hector's every move, not missing even the subtlest expression. After listening to their chatter, the physically immobile Hector slowly extended his hand to express his gratitude. However, as the two shook hands and pretended to reconcile, Gus noticed Hector's expression suddenly relax. Hector seemed to have a look of confidence. After Juan left, Gus immediately called Mike.
Lalo Salamanca lives.
Meanwhile, Juan, who had just left, went straight to Nacho's house to look for clues. He found Nacho's fake IDs in the safe, prepared for his escape, and discovered several overseas remittances and a mysterious phone number. Juan tried to call the number.
Usted locotillo, ¿cómo le puedo ayudar?
Disculpe, número equivocado.
However, he didn't know that all of this was a trap set by Gus in advance. Just before they went to see Hector, Gus had arranged for Mike and his men to go to Nacho's house. They escorted Nacho's girlfriend away, telling her never to return. Then Mike had his men open Nacho's safe and take everything inside. Mike saw the documents Nacho had prepared for his father and himself. Mike puts Nacho's father's papers in his own pocket in order to keep Nacho's father out of trouble, which is what Nacho has always wanted to do. Soon, they purchased an identical safe and put everything back inside, including Nacho's fake IDs, which Juan later found. Then Mike took an envelope out of his coat. Inside were the bank transfer receipts and phone number that Gus had prepared for Juan. The motel where Gus arranged for Nacho to hide was the one Juan called earlier. Gus leaked Nacho's hideout to Juan because he knew Juan would send people to kill Nacho. Once Nacho was dead, the only person who could implicate him would be gone. This plan to kill with a borrowed knife was quite clever. To monitor Nacho, Gus arranged for someone to hide in a small shed at the motel. If Nacho left the motel, Gus's plan would have to be adjusted. However, Gus didn't anticipate that the clever Nacho would discover he was being watched. He quietly slipped out the back window. To find out who was behind this, Nacho ambushed the watcher, who revealed his simple task of reporting if Nacho left. Hearing this, Nacho suspected Gus and called Gus's man, saying he felt uneasy and wanted to leave the motel. Before the other party could persuade him, Nacho hung up the phone. Immediately, the watcher's phone rang. This confirmed Nacho's suspicions.
No puedes disparar, amigo. Hasta en este pueblo de mierda, alguien oyó un balazo y ya valió.
Nacho decided to leave the dangerous place quickly. He picked up an iron rod from the ground and found a pickup truck. Finding no keys in the truck, Nacho tried to start it by force. At that moment, a black SUV suddenly stopped at the entrance, and several armed men rushed into the yard. They were assassins sent by Juan. Nacho lay in the truck, barely daring to breathe. and used the rearview mirror to observe the situation outside. Unexpectedly, the cousins also arrived, but luckily they didn't notice Nacho in the pickup. Seizing the opportunity, Nacho hurriedly tried to start the truck. Just before he could get it going, the assassins spotted him. A fierce gunfight ensued, drawing more of their accomplices. Soon, Nacho ran out of bullets, while the assassins kept firing. Just as Nacho was about to be killed, one assassin was shot and fell.
Vivo.
It turned out the cousins wanted to capture Nacho alive to find out who was behind this. In a critical moment, Nacho finally started the pickup and quickly reversed towards the cousins. This scene was reminiscent of Hank's counterattack on the cousins in Breaking Bad. Nacho was trapped in front of the yard, and to escape, he had to fight his way out. This is the most heartbreaking episode of the classic American TV series Better Call Saul. To ensure his father's safety, Nacho resolutely decides to sacrifice himself. In Nacho, we see a man caught in circumstances beyond his control, threatened by Gus. He has no choice but to betray the Salamanca family. Just when Nacho thinks he has completed his mission, he realizes that Gus intends for him to take the fall without any real plan to rescue him. Moreover, Gus reveals Nacho's location, ultimately leading to Nacho being surrounded by the ruthless cousins, desperate to survive. Nacho has no choice but to grit his teeth and drive his pickup truck towards the gate. Because the cousins want to capture Nacho alive to uncover the mastermind behind the betrayal, they don't kill him outright but instead shoot out his tires to prevent his escape. Soon, the truck is forced to a halt due to the blown-out tires. Nacho exits the vehicle, ready to fight the cousins to the death. At that moment, he notices an abandoned oil tank nearby. Nacho thinks he might evade capture there, so he hurriedly runs towards the tank. Although the inside smells terrible, it is nothing compared to the value of his life. Nacho decisively crawls into the oil tank, using the decayed side panels to observe the situation outside. Soon, the cousins discover his abandoned pickup truck and begin searching the area. Unfortunately, Marco notices the nearby oil tank and starts walking towards it. Nacho had no choice but to hide in the waste oil of a corner tank. He pinches his nose, holds his breath, and plunges in. At that moment, Marco peeks inside but finds nothing unusual. Under Lionel's call, Marco left the area, and they continued their search elsewhere. When Nacho emerges, he is covered in oil and grime. He cautiously peers through a gap to confirm the cousins have left before he finally breathes a sigh of relief. Nacho no longer dares to venture out during the day and waits until nightfall to make his escape. Nacho didn't know which would come first, tomorrow or the accident. He tried to contact his father but his mobile phone was broken. Helpless, Nacho continues his flight. At dawn, he finds a water pipe to clean the oil off his body. Nacho thought no one was around, but he was still discovered by the shop owner, Samaritano. Nacho, on high alert, prepared to draw his gun. Samaritano has no ill intentions. He merely wants to give Nacho a towel to clean himself and provide some clean clothes. Nacho pulls out some cash, asking to use Samaritano's phone. Samaritano said he could use it without charging him. Nacho first calls his father. When Manuel heard that it was his son calling, he wasn't too excited. Knowing that Nacho was working for criminals, he had been trying to convince his son to turn himself in. However, Nacho didn't heed his father's advice and instead wants to take him on the run. Their last meeting ended on a sour note because of this. Manuel asks Nacho how he is and why he is calling. Nacho replies that there's nothing much. He just wanted to hear his father's voice. Nacho knows that in his current situation, one misstep could mean he would never hear his father's voice again. Manuel detected something strange in Nacho's voice. At this moment, Nacho was overwhelmed with mixed emotions. He choked up but forced himself not to reveal his true situation to his father because he didn't want him to worry. Manuel earnestly advised him to turn himself in. Nacho, choking up, nodded and agreed to his father's advice.
Sí, papá. Te entiendo. Te oigo.
¿Qué más queda de decir? Adiós, hijo.
Saddened, Nacho quickly adjusted himself because he still had unfinished tasks. He then made a mysterious phone call. Meanwhile, Gus, suspecting that Lalo was still alive, arranged for snipers to protect himself. His subordinates reported that Nacho was not answering his phone, and his location was unknown. As for Lalo, there was no news either. Mike suggested that if Lalo intended to take revenge, he would have arrived already. The fact that he hadn't shown up indicated he was hesitant to kill Gus. If something happens to Gus, the higher-ups will blame the Salamanca family. putting them in a difficult situation as well. Mike speculated that Lalo might be searching for Nacho. Once he found Nacho, he could force him to reveal the mastermind. Mike wanted to bring Nacho back quickly because he could guess what Nacho was going through. But no matter what Mike said, Gus remained expressionless. He even accidentally knocked over his glass while pouring water. This incident reflected that Gus, when faced with a tricky situation, could also be flustered. Gus picked up the broken glass from the floor, then told Mike to continue explaining his plan. Mike said the best plan now was to take a few elites and bring Nacho back, but he didn't know Gus's true intentions. Gus threw the broken glass into the trash can and then asked Tyrus to bring Nacho's father over. Hearing this, Mike firmly objected. Tyrus pulled out his gun and stood by Gus's side. Seeing this, Mike closed the door and stated that no matter what happened next, it wouldn't be the outcome Gus wanted. As the standoff continued, Mike's phone suddenly rang in his pocket.
It's him.
Oh, I've been calling for hours. He hasn't picked up once.
He's been trying to get me since he left Salamanca's. You want me to answer it?
Gus nodded, allowing Mike to answer the call.
Yeah.
You knew that I was going to Mexico to die, that I was never supposed to make it out of that motel. And you let it happen.
Not my call.
What happens now?
That's up to you.
Is that bastard with you? Put him on.
He wants to talk to you.
Nacho's call was timely. He had seen through Gus's plan to pin the attack on Salamanca on him and then kill him. But now it was clear that Gus had not achieved his goal. Nacho knew who Gus was and understood that only Mike could be trusted to protect his father. Nacho proactively proposed a deal with Gus. He was willing to cover for Gus' lies on the condition that Gus guaranteed his father's safety.
If you are true to your word, there will be no reason for anyone to harm your father.
You are not the one that I need to hear it from.
Your dad's gonna be okay.
How do you know?
Because anyone who goes after him is gonna have to come through me.
Hearing this from Mike, Nacho felt relieved. To repay the garage owner, Samaritano, Nacho left all his money with him. This gesture implied that Nacho was ready for sacrifice. At night, Nacho was smuggled back. Mike prepared a last supper for him. Before Nacho could finish his meal, Gus's henchman Victor arrived. Seeing that Nacho had no apparent injuries, he wanted to beat him up for show. Mike drove Victor away, saying he would handle it himself. Mike helped Nacho because he saw a reflection of his own son in him. His son, like Nacho, was in a harsh environment but retained his inner goodness. In the dead of night, Gus came to check on Nacho and reviewed Nacho's script for the next day's execution to ensure everything was foolproof. Before he left, Mike asked to come with him tomorrow to make sure that something unexpected would happen. Left alone in the room, Nacho saw the broken glass shards Gus had thrown in the trash, and a bold idea popped into his mind. He picked up one of the glass shards. The next day, Mike, acting as a bodyguard, got out of the car early and reluctantly said his final goodbye to Nacho. Tyrus tied Nacho's hands but didn't notice the glass shard in Nacho's hand. The Salamanca family had been waiting for some time. Mike's sniper position was the same spot where he had previously prepared to assassinate Hector. Gus's men threw Nacho down and then escorted him to the Salamanca family. One ripped the tape off Nacho's mouth, stating that Nacho was doomed to die today. If he cooperated, his death would be quick. Otherwise, he would suffer. One asked Nacho who was behind this, and Nacho looked towards Gus. Gus felt a moment of panic. Nacho gripped the glass shard tightly, determined to control his own fate. He confessed according to the pre-rehearsed script, stating he had accepted favors from the Peruvian hate gang to frame Hector's nephew, Lalo. Hearing this, Hector furiously rang his bell in protest, pointing angrily at Gus. Seeing this, one assisted Hector in questioning Nacho about other accomplices.
Him? You think the chicken man? What a joke. Alvarez has been paying me for years, but you know what? I would have done it for free because I hate every last one of you. Psycho, Sax. He's a soulless pig. And I wish I killed him with my own hands. And you know what else, Hector? I put you in that chair. Oh yeah, your heart meds. I switched them for sugar pills. You dead and buried, and I had to watch this asshole bring you back. So when you are sitting in your shitty nursing home and you're sucking down on your Jell-O night after night for the rest of your life, you think of me. You twisted.
Hearing Nacho's words, Hector was so enraged that he nearly stood up from his wheelchair. Nacho, having confessed everything, took the opportunity to cut his bindings and quickly held Juan hostage. The situation instantly descended into chaos. Mike saw the sudden change and tried to get Nacho to take one of them with him, but Nacho didn't do it because killing Juan wouldn't benefit Gus. Without achieving Gus's goal, his father's safety would be in jeopardy. In his final moments, Nacho decisively chose to end his own life. He preferred to die on his own terms rather than at someone else's hands. Do you remember what Nacho once said to Don Iladayo?
Quiero tomar mis propias decisiones, seguir mi propio camino. No quiero que nadie ni por un momento piense en jugármela y yo no quiero tener que estar viendo por encima de mis hombros.
Seemingly an ordinary couple, they lived with a group of heavily armed bodyguards. The couple carried on with their daily lives as if these men didn't exist. They did this to conceal their true identities. Their home was filled with surveillance equipment. Anyone who's ever watched Breaking Bad will recognize this door. That's right, this is the luxurious mansion of the notorious Gus. This cycling couple was also working for Gus. This was one of Gus's methods to protect himself by diverting attention. Remember when Walter, in Breaking Bad, mustered the courage to assassinate Gus, only to be spotted before he even reached the door? It shows how meticulous Gus was about his security. After watching Better Call Saul, we understand just how formidable the Gus Walter killed really was. To guard against Lalo lurking in the shadows for revenge, Gus wore a bulletproof vest every day and kept his gun with him 24/7. Gus wanted to take off his gun holster and relax, but knowing Lalo was still alive, he couldn't let his guard down. He strapped the holster back to his ankle. He then went to the basement and moved a cabinet against the wall. What appeared to be an electrical panel was actually a combination lock, which opened to reveal a tunnel leading to a surveillance room across the street. To confuse his enemies, Gus arranged for a double to go to his own house. Upon reaching the other side, the couple continued to do their thing as if Gus wasn't even there. Gus arrived at the surveillance room. Mike mentioned that they had been monitoring for a long time without any sign of Lalo and had checked other possible locations too. Mike thought Gus was being overly cautious, suggesting that Lalo might really be dead, but Gus insisted on his perspective. Gus's judgment was correct. At that moment, Lalo had already reached a bar in Germany to find evidence that could bring Gus down. Lalo tracked down Werner's widow, Margarethi. Werner had once worked on a project for Gus. Previously, Lalo had extracted some information from Werner over the phone. He knew that Werner's wife, Margarethi, was about to arrive in New Mexico, so he mentioned a familiar place to catch her attention. Quickly, Lalo used his humorous, charming, and gentlemanly demeanor to win Margarethi over. They introduced themselves and naturally sat down together to drink and chat. Under Lalo's sly guidance, the unsuspecting Margarethi soon talked about her husband's accident in the US. She had been told that a cave-in accident led to her husband's unfortunate death. Lalo probed for details about Werner's specific project. However, Margarethi explained that her husband's work was confidential, and he had never mentioned any specifics. Seeing this route was blocked, Lalo decided to approach Werner's colleagues. Unfortunately, none of them attended Werner's funeral. Hearing this, Lalo was somewhat speechless. To gather more clues, he patiently continued chatting with Margarethi about other topics. They talked late into the night, and Lalo, still very gentlemanly, escorted Margarethi home. By this time, Margarethi was quite taken with the charming man before her, but out of respect for her late husband, she did not invite Lalo in. After saying goodnight, Lalo pretended to leave. He then spent the whole night watching from the shadows. The next day, after Margarethi went to work, Lalo quietly broke into her house, hoping to find some useful clues. It must be said, Lalo's emotional intelligence is incredibly high. Even Margarethi's dog was charmed into behaving obediently. If you were a woman, could you resist such temptation? Lalo sneaked upstairs and began searching through the house, but then Margarethi came home, having forgotten her mobile phone in her haste to leave the house. Hearing the noise, Lalo quietly drew his gun. Margarethi retrieved her phone and was about to leave when her dog started barking incessantly. She opened the door to see what was wrong. She hadn't yet picked up the dog when it quickly ran to the top of the stairs. Margaretti put the puppy back and then she was going to sneak upstairs to see what was going on. At that crucial moment Lalo saw a handmade object, a souvenir given to him by Werner's apprentice, and a key message underneath. Hearing Margaretti's footsteps, Lalo hurriedly put the item back. When Margaretti came upstairs, she found nothing amiss. Looks like she had a false alarm. Just as Margaretti was about to leave, she suddenly realized that the upper window had been left open. Little did she know, she had just had a close brush with death. A man is chopping wood in the forest when he suddenly sees a stranger approaching with ill intent. Instinctively, he grips his axe tightly and runs desperately towards the small cabin deep in the woods. Sure enough, the strange man behind him comes after him with a gun, and Lalo opens the door and cautiously enters to take a look. After all, this is someone else's territory. Soon, Casper knocks Lalo to the ground with an axe.
Who are you? Who are you? Eduardo Salamanca.
Lalo pleads in pain and makes it clear why he's here. He just wants to ask what kind of work they're doing for Gus. Casper questions how Lalo found him. Lalo mentions that he found him through Werner's wife. And then Lalo slowly pulls out the name tag of a gift Casper had given Werner. Just as Casper moves closer to take a better look, Lalo seizes the opportunity and launches a counterattack. The tables turn instantly, showcasing the difference between an ordinary person and a professional killer. Lalo unties his belt, instructing Casper to bind his leg because he hasn't gotten the answers he needs and can't let Casper bleed to death. Meanwhile, Gus is anxious about the lurking Lalo, so much so that he doesn't dare remove his bulletproof vest or ankle gun even while working at the chicken restaurant. Seeing his employees overwhelmed, Gus personally takes orders for customers. However, while recommending the latest product, his thoughts drift to his underground project. Perhaps Lalo's long absence is due to him gathering evidence against him. This realization heightens Gus's anxiety. Despite the heavy security, Gus cannot sleep soundly. To prevent any sudden incidents, Gus instructs Mike to take him to the underground base. Mike assures him that the area is completely sealed off with concrete and that no one can get in. If Gus is worried, Mike can arrange for additional security. Seeing Gus's silence, Mike tactfully goes outside to wait. Once Mike leaves, Gus begins to familiarize himself with the layout. He notes the connection point of the temporary lighting and then releases the safety clip, placing it on the ground. Next, he measures the distance from the electrical connector to the excavator with precise steps. He squats down, touches the track of the excavator, and then places the gun from his ankle into it. Gus has figured out that Lalo is looking for this lab, and the two of them are likely to confront each other here. This gun is his key to turning the tables. One has to admit, Gus's sixth sense is truly remarkable. At this moment, Lalo is already positioned in the sewer, targeting Gus's underground lab disguised as a laundry room. To prove to his boss what Gus is secretly up to, Lalo even records a video as evidence.
Y le puedo decir lo que está allá adentro. Un hoyo grande, donde un ingeniero alemán, Werner Ziegler, diseñó el lugar perfecto para esconder el...
Lalo's actions were prompted by Hector's warning, so he decides to inform his uncle about tonight's operation. However, just as the call connects, a vigilant Lalo hears a faint buzzing sound of electrical interference. He realizes that Hector's phone is being monitored by Gus and quickly hangs up. At this point, Lalo's anger was so intense that he picked up a stool and threw it to vent his anger. After calming down, Lalo decides to call back. This time, Lalo intentionally tells Hector that he can't find any evidence and will have to resort to his original plan of direct retaliation. Hearing this, Hector frantically rings his bell in protest, unaware that this is a false message Lalo wants Gus to overhear. Sure enough, as soon as the call ends, Gus's men start reacting. Mike is the first to prepare to report to the boss. At that moment, Gus is at a school doing a charity event. Seeing Mike arrive suddenly, Gus realizes something urgent must have happened and sets aside his work. Mike plays the recording of Lalo's conversation with Hector and advises Gus to wrap up the event and return to his safe house immediately. The trap for Lalo is already set. They just need him to take the bait. On the other side, Kim finds a powerful excuse to get back at Howard. Her plan is to undermine Howard's reputation with his partners, forcing an early settlement of the Sandpiper Crossing case. This way, Jimmy can secure a large settlement to support their so-called dreams. Anything Kim wants to do, Jimmy fully supports. Messing with people is Jimmy's forte, and combined with Kim's cleverness, they devise a meticulous plan spanning several weeks. Their first step is to sow seeds of doubt. Jean stood guard outside while Jimmy sneaked into the locker room to plant contraband and frame Howard. The next step was to cleverly use the Kettlemans to deepen Clifford's suspicions about Howard. The third step is for Clifford to witness it firsthand. Kim finds an excuse to chat with Clifford while Jimmy steals Howard's car and throws a prostitute out of it right in front of Clifford. Now, Howard's image with his partners is completely shattered. Although there were minor hiccups along the way, Jimmy's clever handling ensured everything went smoothly. The fourth step is to use a private detective to sow discord between Howard, so that Howard thought he had the upper hand and caught Jimmy's hand. Little does Howard know, this is exactly what Jimmy wants. The fifth step is for Kim to gather information about Judge Casimiro from her former assistant. With the intel in hand, the sixth step is to fake a photo with Casimiro, spreading rumors of Saul bribing the judge to tarnish Casimiro's image in Howard's eyes, leading him to make poor decisions. Step 7 involved drugging Howard to dilate his pupils, creating a false impression to test the drug's effects. Jimmy tries it himself. This time, when they visited the Caldera house to buy contraband, they encountered another surprise, the little black book in Caldera's possession. Caldera uses this notebook to access various underground resources but wants to abandon this business to focus on his veterinary practice. Jimmy thinks Caldera is foolish for giving up such a lucrative business. Jimmy is interested in taking over. In Breaking Bad, the contact that Walter and Jesse used to flee, Ed, is a resource that Saul acquired from Caldera. In the entire Breaking Bad universe, Caldera is the smartest because he knows when to quit and understands what he truly wants. With the miracle drug in hand, Jimmy and Kim are ready for action. They are having so much fun that the night before the operation, they even celebrate early outside the HHM law firm building. The next day, Jimmy spends a fortune on a bottle of sapphire blue wine. It's the same wine they drank during their first con, holding significant meaning for both Jimmy and Kim. However, as Jimmy prepares to pay, he notices a discrepancy between Casimiro and the actor in their staged photo. This discovery infuriates Jimmy. With their plan about to culminate, this mishap could ruin everything. Jimmy quickly calls Kim, urging her to see the bright side. If he hadn't spotted the flaw, their entire plan would have collapsed. Jimmy suggested changing the date of the final battle. Kim, enraged, ignores Jimmy's advice, abandons her current work, and rushes back to fix the issue.
It happens today.
With no other choice, Jimmy quickly finds the actor they previously used. Without an appointment, he has to offer more money to get him to leave, including 3 college students currently in class. Kim arrives to help. After considerable effort, they finally capture the photo they need. While developing the photo, Jimmy and Kim watch intently. Once the photo is ready, they quickly apply a mysterious substance to it. Jimmy then sprinted 100 meters to hand over the freshly finished photos to the private detective's hands. This speed, even professional detectives are impressed by the body. Of course, the detective also lived up to his promise. He was on time to hand over the photos that Jimmy had just taken to Howard. During the formal meeting, Jimmy impersonates a sandpiper crossing case client to gain access to the conference call. This allows him to listen in live. When Howard sees the presiding judge for the first time, he's shocked. Isn't this the same judge who received Jimmy's bribe this morning? Enraged, Howard publicly lashes out at Casimiro. To back up his accusations, Howard asks his assistant to bring the photos he just received from the private investigator. However, he finds the photos have been swapped, combined with the special drug that dilates his pupils. This leads directly to Howard's breakdown. Howard realizes he's been outsmarted by Jimmy but can't find evidence. Just like Chuck couldn't before, he tries to explain to his partner Clifford, but it's too late. The opposing legal team seizes the advantage due to this turn of events. Under pressure, Clifford has no choice but to immediately settle the sandpiper crossing case. Due to Jimmy and Kim's scheming, Howard's situation becomes a complete mess. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Kim, listening to their victory, are engaged in unspeakable activities on the sofa. Though Howard lacks concrete proof, he knows Jimmy and Kim are behind this, so he confronts them at their home that night. Facing Howard's sarcasm, Jimmy and Kim feign ignorance. Howard can't understand what drove them to do this. Was it because he sided with Chuck or sent Kim to the cornfield to review documents? Or perhaps they envied his good fortune, inheriting a successful law firm from his father. Jimmy and Kim continue their act. Howard admits he's at a low point in his life. dealing with debt, depression, and a broken marriage, but insists he'll get through it. He then offers a candid evaluation of Jimmy and Kim.
You two are soulless. Jimmy, you can't help yourself. Chuck knew it. You were born that way. But you, one of the smartest and most promising human beings I've ever known. And this is the life you choose. You're perfect for each other. Screw the money. You did it for fun. You get off on it. You're like Leopold and Loeb, two sociopaths.
All right, that's enough.
Oh, you know it's true. You just have the guts to admit it.
Great, now you need to go.
I'm going to make it clear to everyone, because I'm going to dedicate my life to making sure that everybody knows the truth.
Just as Howard is getting into his speech, the candlelight flickers, and Jimmy clings to Kim in terror. To their utter shock, Lalo suddenly appears, because Lalo saw a cockroach in the sewer, which reminded him of Jimmy. Unfortunately, there was one more person on the scene who shouldn't have been there.
I just need to talk to my lawyers.
Oh, is that right? You want some advice? Find better lawyers.
Howard, please just turn around.
No. Take your time.
What's this about?
Lalo slowly draws his gun, and Jimmy and Kim realize the situation has spiraled out of control.
Please just tell us what you want.
I think I'm in the middle of something. There's really no need to...
Lalo shoots, intending to instill fear in Jimmy and Kim and prevent Howard from causing further complications, but this leaves the audience feeling deeply aggrieved by Howard's unjust demise. This man is really unfortunate. When Howard came to see Jimmy, everything was fine, but who could have imagined he wouldn't be able to return? This situation directly scared Jimmy and Kim out of their wits. The ruthless killer Lalo made them quiet down because he still had a task for Jimmy and Kim to complete. Lalo threw a car key to Jimmy and then gave him Gus's address. In the car, there was a camera and a revolver. Lalo gave Jimmy 1 hour to complete the mission of assassinating Gus and take a photo as proof. Otherwise, his wife Kim would be killed. Jimmy suggested that Kim go because she, as a woman, would make others less suspicious. This was also Jimmy's way of protecting Kim because being with Lalo was even more dangerous. But Kim doesn't want to put Jimmy in danger either, so they push each other and almost argue. Hearing this, Lalo became a bit impatient. He agreed to Jimmy's suggestion to let Kim go. Since Lalo agreed, Kim had no reason not to go. However, just as Kim was about to leave, Lalo called her back.
You're gonna need your shoes, right?
It seemed that Kim was really scared senseless, as she even forgot to wear her shoes when going out. Kim reluctantly looked back at Jimmy because this parting might be a life and death separation.
There you go. Okay, so 1 hour starting now. Clock's ticking, Mrs. Goodman.
After Kim left, Lalo tied Jimmy up and told him about his family being attacked. The traitor who betrayed him was Nacho, and it was Jimmy who Nacho introduced to Lalo. Upon hearing this, Jimmy hastily denied his relationship with Nacho, but Lalo didn't care what he said because he knew that Jimmy's best skill was making things up. Lalo turned the TV volume up to its maximum to cover Jimmy's cries for help inside the house. Then he took Jimmy's car keys and started his action. Jimmy struggled desperately in the chair trying to break free from the bindings, but he accidentally fell to the ground along with the chair. From this angle, Jimmy was looking directly into the eyes of Howard, who had just been killed. Meanwhile, Kim is on her way to Gus's house, waiting at a red light when she encounters the police. Although Kim rolled down the window, she didn't dare to report the situation. Soon, Kim arrived at Gus's door according to the address given by Lalo. She took out the camera and gun from the glove compartment and then walked cautiously towards Gus's door. Anyone who came to Gus's door would be monitored, and Kim was no exception. At the door, Kim gently rang the doorbell. Seeing a shadow flash through the peephole, she reluctantly took out the gun. This scene was reminiscent of Jesse's assassination of Gail. Unfortunately, this was Gus's territory. Before Kim could react, Mike pushed her directly into the house. All of this was within Gus's surveillance view. Seeing the assassination attempt fail, Kim wanted to go back and save Jimmy but was held back by Mike. Kim confessed that she was sent by Lalo to assassinate the owner of the house. Originally, Lalo wanted to send Jimmy, but was persuaded to change his mind. Hearing this, Mike immediately led a team to rescue Jimmy. Of course, he had to report the next actions to Gus before leaving. Meanwhile, Lalo took the opportunity to sneak into Gus's laundry facility. Although the surveillance had captured Lalo's figure, He had already entered a blind spot before the security personnel could be in place. To avoid exposure, Lalo planned to crawl in through the ventilation fan. Lalo's feint strategy was indeed quite clever, but his actions still didn't escape Gus's sharp eyes. Gus called his men and had Kim answer the phone.
Why did Lalo send you?
Who is this? He didn't want to send me, not at first. He wanted to send my husband. But my husband talked him out of it because he wanted to get me out of there.
He talked Lalo out of it.
That's right.
Hearing this, Gus was more convinced that Lalo's goal was to find evidence in the laundry facility. Sending someone to assassinate him was just a cover for Lalo's actions. So, Gus took 2 of his men to the laundry facility. Upon arrival, his men reported no activity there, but Gus was not convinced. Gus inspected the area carefully. Suddenly, he saw a bent blade on the ventilation fan and realized that Lalo had already sneaked into the laundry facility. Then there were several gunshots, and all of Gus's men fell to the ground. Lalo finally shows up. Meanwhile, Mike had also arrived at Jimmy's apartment. Since the curtains were all drawn, the snipers couldn't see inside, so Mike had to lead his team directly in. At this time, Jimmy was still lying on the ground. After entering, Mike untied the cloth gag from Jimmy's mouth and learned that Lalo had left the apartment right after Kim. Realizing they had fallen for Lalo's trick, Mike immediately called Gus. By this time, Gus was already being controlled by Lalo, and his phone had been thrown aside. Lalo took out a video camera and began mocking Gus, then ordered Gus to take him to see his underground laboratory. Seeing Gus's reluctance, Lalo shot him directly in the chest. It seemed the quality of the bulletproof vest was quite good. Gus pretended to reluctantly open the secret door. Feeling triumphant, Lalo became somewhat arrogant. To vent his anger, he kicked Gus down the stairs. Worried about running out of bullets, Lalo deliberately changed to a new magazine. With this evidence, Lalo could condemn Gus to death. He mocked Gus for digging his own grave. Gus stated that Lalo couldn't kill him yet because he had something to say to Don. Hearing this, Lalo was curious to see what tricks Gus had up his sleeve. He gave Gus 1 minute. Little did Lalo know, this was Gus's stalling tactic. Remember the scene from the last episode where Gus prepared the site? When Gus expressed his dissatisfaction with the cartel, the camera focused on a wiring point and the gun he had hidden under the excavator's tracks. What followed was Gus's moment of turning the tables.
Hector? Yeah, I kept him alive. Before he dies, he will know I buried every one of you.
You done?
No, not yet.
The words Gus had just spoken also echoed the storyline in Breaking Bad. He truly took down the entire criminal organization on his own. Finally, Gus demonstrated his success in avenging himself in front of Hector. Gus turned on the temporary lighting to see Lalo already lying in a pool of blood. Now that Gus had seen Lalo die with his own eyes, the stone hanging in his heart finally fell. Although Gus was wearing a bulletproof vest, he was still shot. Fortunately, it didn't hit any vital areas. Then he called an employee to request a week-long vacation. Mike was angry about Gus's actions. He blamed Gus for making decisions on his own without informing him. If anything went wrong, he couldn't bear the responsibility. Then Mike went to Jimmy's apartment to deal with Howard's body. Jimmy was still worried that Lalo would come after them again. Mike assured him that this time it wouldn't happen, since Mike had made the same promise last time. Jimmy no longer believed him. Mike explained to Jimmy and Kim what they needed to do next. Just like in Breaking Bad, after Jane died, Mike instructed Jesse on what to do. Mike would come up with a foolproof story to deal with the police.
Someone calls you, someone at the courthouse mentions it. The moment that happens, you call the cops. His car was here for hours last night. Good chance somebody noticed it. That means you are the last people to see him alive. Cops are going to want to hear from you. You tell the cops you saw him. He came here. Seemed like maybe he was chemically altered. Didn't make a lick of sense. Then he left, that's all you know. You keep telling the lie that you've been telling.
After explaining everything, Mike had one more important task to do, which was to dispose of Lalo and Howard's bodies. Ironically, Howard would be buried underground with the man who killed him. With the burial of Howard and Lalo, the series gradually draws to a close. Following Mike's instructions, Jimmy and Kim acted as if nothing had happened and went to work the next day as usual. Mike led his men to Jimmy's apartment to clean up the crime scene. When Jimmy and Kim returned home, although the scene had been thoroughly cleaned, the shadow of Howard's tragic death lingered in their hearts forever. Jimmy understood Kim's feelings at that moment, so he picked up his luggage and prepared to stay at a hotel temporarily. Remember Jimmy's ordeal at the border last time? Barely escaping death, Jimmy asked Mike how to forget everything, and Mike had given him this advice. Smart Jimmy learned fast. He directly transposed Mike's words to persuade Kim.
One day we'll wake up and brush our teeth and we'll go to work. And at some point we'll suddenly realize that we haven't thought about it at all. None of it.
In this scene, the painting above the bed looked familiar. Fans of Breaking Bad would recognize it as it appeared twice in that show, both times symbolizing Walter drifting apart from his family. The same painting appearing here also hinted at Jimmy and Kim's impending separation. Meanwhile, because Lalo had called Hector before his final action to say he was going after Gus for revenge, Hector knew his plan. Unfortunately, Lalo didn't get his revenge and instead lost his life. Due to Lalo's disappearance, Hector accused Gus in front of Don. However, without any evidence to accuse Don's cash cow and with Gus's flawless setup, Hector failed in his attempt. Don directly ordered Hector to leave. In Don's eyes, there were no permanent friends, only permanent interests. Since there was no one to manage the Salamanca territory in the north, Don put Gus in charge of it. But Don wasn't naive. He saw the hatred in Gus's eyes and reminded Gus not to forget who the boss was as he left. Gus continued to endure, never forgetting the scene of Max's tragic death by the pool. Taking down the Salamanca family was a significant step forward in Gus's path of revenge. With the most dangerous Lalo now dead, Gus felt unprecedented relief. He opened all the windows and arranged for Mike to continue finding a construction crew. Gus could finally build his underground commercial empire with peace of mind. Gus also makes his official exit in this episode, allowing the storyline to seamlessly connect with Breaking Bad. Similarly, Mike also makes his final exit in this episode. Before the end, he does one last thing. He tells Nacho's father about Nacho. They both lost their sons, and Mike understands Manuel's feelings, but he wanted Manuel to know that Nacho wasn't an irredeemable criminal.
Your son made some mistakes. He fell in with bad people. But he was never like them. Not really. He had a good heart. One more thing. You won't have to worry about the Salamancas. Their day is coming. There'll be justice.
What you talk of is revenge. It never ends. Ustedes son el cartel y su justicia. Todos son iguales.
As an outsider, Manuel can see more clearly the true nature of these people. On the other side, Jimmy and Kim arrive at the HHM law firm for Howard's memorial. The trash can that Jimmy once kicked has already been replaced. Since Jimmy and Kim have to keep up the lie, they must continue acting in front of everyone. But this performance is a real test of psychological endurance. Jimmy and Kim first greet Rick. From Rick, they learn that HHM is going to downsize because all three key figures of HHM are gone, marking the end of the HHM era. Since they are already here, they must pretend to be calm and console Howard's wife, Cheryl. Because Howard had told his wife earlier that Jimmy was messing with him, Howard asked her not to believe the rumors. Additionally, since Jimmy and Kim were the last to see Howard alive, Cheryl wanted Jimmy to repeat the statement he gave to the police. Jimmy had no reason to refuse the request, so he repeated the story Mike had fabricated, but he left out any mention of Howard seemingly using illegal substances. Cheryl wants to know why Jimmy said that Howard was using illegal substances. She believed her husband would never touch that stuff and said there must be more to the case. Seeing that Jimmy had no reason to refute Cheryl, Kim, after an intense internal struggle, decided to lie one last time to support Jimmy.
Please, just spit it out. It was about 1.5 years ago. I was still an associate here, working late on a brief. And I saw a light on in Howard's office. I assumed the cleaning crew left it on by mistake.
And
Howard was there at his desk. head down. And he was snorting something. I never told anyone. But now I wish I had.
Hearing this, Cheryl couldn't believe Howard would do that. She asked Howard's old friend Clifford if he had seen anything. Clifford knew there were suspicions of Howard using illegal substances, but he didn't realize it was a trap set by Kim and Jimmy, so he didn't give Cheryl the answer she was looking for. Cheryl broke down once again.
You saw him every day. You knew him better than anyone. Maybe I misunderstood what I saw. Please excuse me.
Afterward, Jimmy and Kim went to the garage, and Kim remained silent. Jimmy urged Kim to let the wounds of the heart heal now that everything was over. However, what Jimmy didn't know was that Kim had secretly decided she couldn't continue like this. Kim looked at Jimmy, gave him a heartfelt kiss, and then drove away. What Jimmy didn't realize was that this was Kim's goodbye kiss to him. Immediately after, Kim submitted a request to the judge to change the lawyer for her client. The judge asked for her reason, and Kim said she had applied to the Bar Association to revoke her law license. When Jimmy found out, he rushed over and pleaded with Kim not to give up her career as a lawyer. He didn't give Kim a chance to speak and said he was willing to face difficulties with her. He wanted to take Kim to a hotel to adjust their mood. However, when he went to the room to pack things, he saw that Kim had already packed her bags.
We are bad for each other.
Don't do this. Kim, please.
Jimmy, I have had the time of my life with you. But we are bad for everyone around us. Other people suffer because of us.
I love you.
I love you too. But so what?
No.
Hearing this, Jimmy was somewhat angry. He felt that Kim shouldn't think Howard's death was their responsibility. He blamed Howard's death on the appearance of that damned Lalo, but Kim revealed that she had known for a while that Lalo wasn't dead. She had noticed someone following her, whom she later warned after discovering them. It wasn't until Mike appeared and explained that Lalo was still alive and that those men were sent by him to protect Jimmy and Kim. Kim really realized her mistake.
Mike told you that Lalo was alive. And you didn't tell me?
It's me. I thought it was a 1 in a million chance that he'd come for us. I thought he would be caught if he did, and I told myself I was protecting you. You'd blame yourself. You'd fear for me. You'd want us to run and hide until you were sure I was safe. You would pull the plug on the scam, and then... because I was having too much fun.
A person's most valuable trait is the ability to recognize their mistakes clearly and make the right adjustments in time, thus preventing themselves from falling into the abyss. Even if one falls into the abyss, there is still a chance to climb out. Kim's departure also accelerated Jimmy's transformation into Saul. Without Kim's restraint, a few years later, Jimmy lived a life of decadence and debauchery. His residence was like a luxurious palace, with a different woman by his side every day. An 18-meter-long dining table was used only by him. Of course, his Cadillac was indispensable. Despite having a lot of money, he still wanted to snag a handicapped parking spot for free. At this point, Saul's law office had become the one scene in Breaking Bad. Saul started his busy day with a mug that had "World's Best Lawyer" printed on it.
Let justice be done, though the heavens fall.
Truly, blood runs thicker than water. Chuck had also said the same thing. When the person you love most decides to leave you, what will you do? Will you choose to face life positively, or will you hide your true feelings and do something bad to numb yourself? In the classic American TV series Breaking Bad spin-off Better Call Saul, the protagonist Jimmy clearly chose the latter. Jimmy and Kim got married in May 2004. In just 2 months, they experienced the most terrible things in their lives, and they also burdened themselves with a guilty conscience. Because of this, Kim decided to leave Jimmy, as she felt that being together was like poison. After Kim left, Jimmy officially transformed into Saul Goodman, continuing his work as a criminal defense attorney at his new law firm. Saul was a little off his game this day because Kim had handed him the divorce papers. The date on them was October 2004, which meant their marriage lasted only about 5 months. Although Saul was a bit unwilling, he forced himself to remain calm and signed the divorce papers. He asked Kim why she chose to go to Florida. Kim hesitated for a moment and was about to explain when Jimmy interrupted. Jimmy felt that explanations no longer mattered. He believed Kim would regret not getting a share of the Sandpiper Crossing settlement money, which was a huge sum. Upon hearing this, Kim wanted to retort, but she held back and swallowed her words. She said she would go to the Civil Affairs office to submit the application tomorrow. Jimmy then acted indifferent and wished Kim a happy life. Kim stayed there for a moment, as if waiting for the old Jimmy to come back, but in the end, she left in helpless disappointment.
Hey, sweet cheeks, who do we got next? Let's make some money.
Emilio Koyama.
This is Emilio, Crazy Eight's cousin from Breaking Bad and Jesse's partner in crime for many years. This also indicates that Saul has started dealing with criminals again. When Kim walked out of the law office, it began to rain heavily in Albuquerque, which was rare. She took out a cigarette to ease her mind. As the camera slowly zoomed in, a scruffy-looking young man came up to her.
Hey, yo. Hey, bump one of those?
Such familiar catchphrases. This person was none other than Jesse, who accompanied Emilio, and also the second male lead in Breaking Bad. From the timeline of the plot, it was about 4 years before Walter was diagnosed with lung cancer. Jesse recognized Kim because she had defended his friend Combo in the past. Combo was killed by a child in Breaking Bad. The RV that Walter and Jesse used to make illegal substances was stolen by Combo from his mom. Jesse thought Kim was very professional for getting Combo off the hook for theft. This time, he came because his brother was in serious trouble and needed a professional lawyer to get him out. Emilio came here because of the ads Saul put out. Jesse felt that a lawyer who made funny ads wasn't very reliable, so he wanted to ask Kim what kind of person Saul was. Kim took a deep breath and didn't give a direct answer.
When I knew him, he was.
This time Kim really left Jimmy, and her life turned into a black and white film. Ordinary and monotonous. Even her beautiful blonde hair was dyed a plain black. She found a simple, honest boyfriend and got a job at a company that manufactures sprinklers. She wanted to use this ordinary job and life to hide her brilliance. Saul's choice was the exact opposite of Kim's. He continued to use his cleverness to walk the line between law and morality. Advertising was Saul's forte. Saul first appeared in the audience's sight in the 8th episode of the 2nd season of Breaking Bad. The opening ad was a hint.
I better call Saul!
I was out partying, minding my own business.
You are under arrest.
I'd better call Saul.
Hi, I'm Saul Goodman. Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do, and so do I. I believe that until proven guilty, every man, woman, and child in this country is innocent. And that's why I fight for you, Albuquerque!
At this time, the combination of Walter and Jesse had already been formed. Badger, who was helping them sell illegal goods, was caught in the act during a sale. Because Saul had built a decent reputation in the circle over the years, Jesse directly brought Walter to Saul's law office.
So how about we get him a real attorney? I mean, what the hell is this? This is who he hires?
What? You kidding me? Look, you remember Emilio? Okay, this dude got Emilio off like twice. Okay? Both times, they had him dead to rights, yo, and then poof. Know what I'm saying?
After some persuasion by Jesse, Walter agreed to Jesse's suggestion, but neither of them wanted to show their faces.
They'll flip for it. Call it.
Heads.
So, Walter put on sunglasses and a baseball cap, posing as Badger's uncle, and came to Saul's office, only to be teased by Saul for looking like D.B. Cooper. Saul explained Badger's situation to Walter. When Walter learned that the DEA wanted to use Badger to track down Heisenberg, the maker of the blue product, he was terrified. Walter wanted to bribe Saul to get Badger out, but because the two were unfamiliar, Saul did not agree. Actually, it was because Walter's offer was too low. At this point, Walter was willing to do anything to protect himself. So, after Saul got off work, Walter and Jesse directly kidnapped him, because Saul had once been kidnapped by Tuco and taken to the desert. He thought he had been captured again by the Mexican Salamanca family, so he nervously started speaking broken Spanish.
Por favor, yo soy abogado! Abogado, abogado!
In the face of life and death, Jimmy spoke the same way, but he didn't know that this time he was being kidnapped by his own countrymen.
No! No, it wasn't me, it was Ignacio, he's the one! Oh no! Oh no! Lalo didn't send you? No, Lalo?
Who?
Oh, thank God!
A nervous Saul was relieved to see that the two men didn't know Lalo. During the negotiation, Walter's coughing gave away their identity. After the negotiations were settled, Saul came to their RV. Seeing the various chemical lab equipment in the RV, The sharp-witted Saul deduced that these two were the manufacturers of the blue illicit substance, and that the middle-aged man in front of him was the Heisenberg the DEA had been searching for. Seeing the money-making opportunity, Saul immediately smelled profit. This was simply a money tree, and Saul couldn't wait to get back to work. However, just as Walter was about to start the RV, it wouldn't start. Walter figured out the temperament of the RV, realizing it was just a matter of the engine idling too long. It just needed a break. Walter pulled the keys out of the car and it went dark, since it was too quiet inside. Jesse initiated some conversation.
Who's Lalo?
Who?
Lalo. Thought some dude named Lalo sent us. You seem pretty freaked out. Never heard of no Lalo on the street.
Lalo was a shadow over Saul's life, so he hurriedly changed the subject. At this moment, Walter tried to start the RV again, and luckily, it didn't stall. Thus, Saul, Walter, and Jesse reached their first cooperation. Afterward, Saul had Mike investigate Walter and Jesse's backgrounds. To Saul's surprise, Walter turned out to be a high school chemistry teacher who also had cancer. Saul worried about Walter's condition. If Walter died, he might lose a lot of money, but Mike said Walter was an amateur. Even if he didn't die, he'd eventually be caught by the police. However, Saul didn't care about that. He knew that the illegal product Walter was making was top-notch and was spreading throughout the streets. Watching Saul's attitude towards Walter, Mike advises him not to deal with people like that. Saul agrees on the outside, but inside he's already feeling the urge. In the end, Saul couldn't resist and went to Walter's school to pitch his services. He knew Walter's needs, especially with some ill-gotten money that Walter would definitely need to launder. Although Walter was wary of Saul's visit, Saul didn't mind, because he believed Walter would come to him sooner or later.
So if you want to make more money and keep the money that you make, better call Saul.
With the rise of Heisenberg in Breaking Bad, Saul also had to prepare for his own escape. Both he and Walter ended up in Ed's underground waiting room. However, when Ed came to get Saul ready to leave, Walter forcefully insisted that Saul stay and help him with his revenge. But Saul said he was no longer a lawyer. He hoped to go into hiding and open a Cinnabon store in Omaha. A few months later, Saul, now renamed Gene, achieved this dream. His life turned into a monotonous black and white existence. He worked discreetly, spoke to few people, and feared being recognized. If he thought someone was watching him, he would become anxious and uneasy. Luckily, it was just a misunderstanding, and Gene breathed a sigh of relief. Gene was very bored at home alone at night. After ensuring no one was outside, he would close the curtains, take out his treasured advertisement DVDs, and watch them. The reflection in the lens showed a splash of color from the ads because, in Gene's eyes, only Saul's life was exciting. At work, although Gene greeted his colleagues, they never got to know him well. It was all superficial. One day after work, Gene went to throw out the trash and accidentally got locked in the garbage room. Seeing the emergency alarm, he didn't dare press it, fearing that a policeman might recognize him. After knocking on the door for a long time with no response, Gene had no choice but to sit and wait for someone to open the door. Gene waited for several hours until an old man came to throw out the trash. Gene walked out without saying a word, but he didn't forget to leave his mark. Saul Goodman was here. However, he ultimately couldn't avoid being found. One day, Gene took a cab home and saw an Albuquerque sign in the Omaha taxi. Remember, the two places are over 1,000 kilometers apart. Gene noticed the driver staring at him, seemingly recognizing him as Saul Goodman from Albuquerque. To be safe, Gene got out of the car halfway. He thought that would be the end of it, but a few days later, the cab driver Jeff found him. Jeff recognized that the man in front of him, Gene, was actually Saul Goodman. Gene denied it, but Jeff insisted that he was indeed the famous Saul. Jeff also said that he was proud of the fact that he'd hauled customers who were more famous than Saul. Seeing that Jeff didn't seem inclined to report him, Gene reluctantly delivered Saul's iconic line.
Better call Saul.
What? I can't even hear that. Once again, and do the point.
Better call Saul.
Jeff was thrilled to have Saul finally acknowledge his identity and said that if Saul ever needed anything, he should call him, and he'd be there. After Jeff left, Gene immediately contacted Ed. They exchanged their secret codes, and just as Gene was about to place the order, he suddenly changed his mind. Instead of running away to another place and facing similar situations again someday, he decided to handle it himself. Soon, Gene found his breakthrough. He used his usual tricks to strike up a conversation with Jeff's mother. When Jeff got home, he saw that Gene had already become quite familiar with his mother. This scared Jeff a lot. Worried about his mother's safety, Jeff didn't reveal Gene's true identity. Instead, he found an opportunity to pull Gene aside and ask him what his intentions were. Little did Jeff know, he was falling into Gene's trap step by step. Gene hit Jeff's weak spot and said he could help him make a lot of money. Hearing about making money, Jeff, who was struggling financially, had no reason to refuse. Gene first managed to befriend the mall's security personnel by bringing them cinnamon rolls from his shop. Previously, Gene had fainted once, and thanks to their timely rescue, he was out of danger, and that's how Gene and Frank got to know each other better. Gene also noted how long it took Frank to eat the cinnamon rolls. Once this was settled, Gene went to the mall to pick out the expensive items and mentally noted the distance between each item. He then hurried to the restroom to write down this information. Based on this, Gene's team recreated the mall's layout in the suburbs. The next step was to train Jeff to retrieve the target items within the specified time. After multiple rounds of practice, Jeff quickly reached the required standard. They hid Jeff in a delivery crate and purposely had it delivered to the mall entrance. Since it was too late to move it, the mall staff compromised and allowed them to leave it until the next morning before opening hours. This played right into Gene's plan. That night, Gene, as usual, brought cinnamon rolls to the security room. When Frank was about to start his meal, Gene signaled Jeff to start the operation. Jeff followed Gene's training precisely and smoothly retrieved the target items. However, just as he was about to finish and leave, he suddenly slipped and fell. Seeing that Frank had finished the last bite of his cinnamon roll while there was still no sign from Jeff, Gene started to panic.
What am I doing?
What?
Look at me. I don't know. I don't know. Oh, Jesus.
Gene?
You have a wife, right, Frank?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's waiting for you.
Gene distracted Frank by engaging him in random chatter. It wasn't until Jeff finally got back on track, took everything, and hid in the restroom that Gene breathed a sigh of relief. After the successful operation, Jeff was overjoyed. Their loot was worth tens of thousands of dollars. At this moment, Gene poured cold water on their heads. Gene pointed out that their crimes were enough to land them in prison for 10 years. If they exposed Gene's true identity, they would be dragged down with him. This was Gene's real purpose. Compared to the cost of seeking Ed's help, Gene's maneuver significantly lowered his expenses and eased his worries. As a result, Gene felt much more relaxed at work. Once again, he had used his skills to achieve a big win. As if Saul had returned, he picked out a stylish black and white patterned shirt in the mall, then held it up and looked at himself in the mirror. At this moment, Gene was reminiscing about Saul's glory days, but he knew those were in the past. Now, as long as he avoided getting caught by the police, he would consider himself lucky. As soon as the woman left the house, she realized she was being followed. To shake off her pursuer, she decisively turned right instead of making the intended left turn. At the next intersection, Francesca turned right again. Seeing that Francesca seemed to have noticed them, the following vehicle made a left turn and gave up, allowing Francesca to finally breathe a sigh of relief. Francesca came back to the same intersection, and when she was sure that no one was following her, she put on her left turn signal and turned left to drive to her destination. Francesca quietly arrived at an abandoned gas station. Seeing it was already 3 o'clock and the promised call had not come, she felt uneasy. She didn't want to answer this call because it was from her ex-boss Saul, who was now a wanted criminal. Francesca placed her hand on the car key, ready to leave as soon as the clock hit 3:01. Finally, the phone rang, and she reluctantly answered.
Yeah.
Oh, good. You're there. Great. Great. Unencumbered by curious eyes and ears, I'm guessing.
Wouldn't have picked up otherwise.
Right. Excellent. Okay. Well then, lay it on me.
First things first.
No, I believe we agreed after.
I'm hanging up.
Okay then. Jeez,
After all the years she'd worked under Saul, Francesca had learned a lot about human nature. In Breaking Bad, she had tricked Walter once to get the information he wanted. Saul, now going by the name Gene, had to reveal the location of his hidden money to Francesca. Gene had hidden the money so carefully that it took Francesca quite a while to find it. As the saying goes, money makes the world go round. Saul wanted to know what the word on the street was about him in Albuquerque. Francesca said she was still often followed. Her personal mail was opened and checked, and her home phone was tapped. She told Gene that he was now the police's only target. The police had found Jesse's car near the southern border and concluded that Jesse had crossed the border. This aligns with the plot of El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie involving Jesse. When Jesse escaped, it was Badger and Skinny who helped create this illusion. The homepage has been updated with an explanation of El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. Those interested can click to watch. Gene then asked about his assets over there, only to find out they had all been seized by the police. Although Gene was very angry, all he could do was vent. Under Gene's persistent questioning, Francesca, who was about to leave, revealed some important information. First, Prosecutor Bill had changed careers and become a lawyer. Saul's old advertisement spot had been replaced with Bill's. This also sets the stage for later developments in the plot. Another piece of information was that Kim, who hadn't been in touch for a long time, called to ask about Saul's situation after the incidents with Walter and Saul. Hearing that Kim still cared about him rekindled the old feelings Gene had buried deep inside. On his way back, Gene couldn't resist finding a phone booth to try to contact Kim. With the information he had about Kim, Gene quickly called the sprinkler company where she worked, reaching out to her under the name Victor. It's the alias Saul used when they were doing the scam together, so Kim knows it's Saul before she picks up the phone. Kim was a bit nervous, as they had been through so much together, and now Saul was a nationally wanted fugitive. Kim tried to calm her nerves before answering Saul's call.
Kim Wexler.
Hey, Kim. You know who this is? I'm gonna take that as a yes.
Gene asked Kim if their conversation could be overheard by the receptionist. Peeking through the curtains, Kim saw the receptionist wasn't bored enough to eavesdrop on their conversation. Kim asked what he wanted. Gene said there was nothing specific. He just wanted to catch up since they hadn't spoken in 6 years. Before Kim could respond, Gene boasted about how great he was, still free and evading capture by those idiots. Hearing that Jimmy was still the same, Kim told him he shouldn't have called. Seeing that Kim wasn't very welcoming, Gene was immediately angry and his attitude was as tough as ever. Kim didn't want to argue and advised him to turn himself in. Hearing Kim suggest he surrender made Gene unhappy.
Set the pot to the kettle? What? That is really rich. You preaching to me? See, you have no idea what I did or didn't do, okay? And why don't you turn yourself in? Seeing as how you're the one with the guilty conscience, huh? What is stopping you? Bring's in the ground. Mike's in the ground. Lalo's in the ground, apparently. You don't have to hold back on my account. They can only hang me once. So go ahead. Spill your guts. Put on your hair shirt. See what it gets you.
I'm glad you're alive.
The hard-won call ended abruptly. Enraged, Gene takes his anger out on the payphone, and as he leaves, he angrily kicks the glass of the phone booth. Agitated, Gene found it hard to focus at work. To escape this state of mind, Gene decided to return to his old ways for a thrill. When Jeff got home, he saw Gene there again, who had even taught his mother how to use a computer. This made Gene seem more considerate than Jeff, her own son. However, what Gene didn't know was that this would lead to trouble. Marion kindly asked her son to quickly bring some wine to entertain Gene. After pouring wine for Marion, Gene made an excuse to take Jeff to the garage. Much to Jeff's surprise, Gene's purpose for this visit was to get him to continue his deception. Having enjoyed the last con, Jeff didn't hesitate to accept Gene's invitation. Gene often targeted bars to scam strangers, a game he frequently played with his old buddy Marco in his younger days. In front of their target, Alfred, Gene pretended to be a bumbling fool, making Alfred completely let his guard down. While they were drinking together, Gene secretly slipped a tube hidden in his sleeve into the glass, using his other hand to suck all the liquor out of the cup. When Alfred wasn't looking, Gene pretended to finish his drink. When they had drunk their fill and were ready to leave, Gene put Alfred in Jeff's taxi. Watching his prey fall into the trap step by step, Gene felt a great sense of satisfaction. In the taxi, Jeff offered Alfred a complimentary bottle of water to quench his thirst. Little did Alfred know the water was laced with something. Seeing Alfred drink the concoction, Jeff sent the signal to his accomplice. Soon, Jeff dropped Alfred off at home. Alfred was even more disoriented than before he drank the water. He wobbled as he opened the door and walked into the house, completely unaware of the tape Jeff had placed on his door lock. Jeff's job was done. The next step was for his accomplice, Buddy, to take over. With Jeff's groundwork, Buddy effortlessly snuck into Alfred's house. By then, Alfred was sleeping like a log. Buddy photographed all of Alfred's ID information and bank card numbers, then put everything back in place. To quickly access the money, Buddy took a blank check from Alfred's checkbook. He also found all the bank account passwords under a placemat. After photographing the passwords, Buddy quickly left the scene. Being his first job, Buddy almost forgot to remove the tape from the lock. Using the same method, they continued their operation, finding targets, getting them into the taxi, making them drink the sedative-laced water, and producing more of the sedative themselves when they ran out. In a short time, they gathered a lot of information. Gene once again experienced the life of Saul, and his stash of money grew, but the good times didn't last. They accidentally targeted a man with cancer. Buddy couldn't go through with it, as his father also had cancer. Hearing this made Gene very angry since they had invested so much effort into this mark. Unwilling to lose such an easy target, Gene decided that Buddy wasn't the right man for the job and promptly kicked him off the team. Jeff, not wanting to anger anyone, stayed neutral. As Buddy left, Gene reminded him to keep his mouth shut. After Buddy was gone, Gene immediately prepared to handle the job himself. Since the tape on the door had already been removed and the sedative had been in effect for too long, they had missed the optimal time. Jeff hesitated but was forced to proceed by Gene's resolute attitude. At the target's door, Gene instructed Jeff to come back and pick him up in 20 minutes. Getting more exhilarated, Gene smashed the glass on the door and sneaked inside. The target was already asleep on the floor. Gene found the important documents and took pictures of them with his camera. He also found the password casually hidden under the lamp. By this time, Jeff had arrived at the door. According to their plan, Gene should have quickly left the scene, but being caught up in the thrill, he didn't leave. Instead, he went upstairs, trying to grab more loot. Jeff was growing impatient outside. While inside, Gene leisurely sipped on a drink. Going upstairs paid off a bit. Gene took all of the target's watches. He also noticed the ashes of the cancer patient's dog. At that moment, he saw that the target downstairs was no longer there, and Gene panicked. Gene tried to go downstairs to escape, only to find the target sitting at the bottom of the stairs. With no other option, Gene grabbed the urn with the dog's ashes, ready to knock him out. Just as he was about to strike, the target fortunately fell back asleep. Seeing this, Gene quietly ran out. At the door, he saw a police car parked behind Jeff. Jeff was a little panicked, so he quietly put the car in D gear. What Jeff didn't know was that the officers were just stopping for a late-night snack. Seeing the scene, the two patrol officers reluctantly got to work. At that moment, Gene seized the opportunity to flee, leaving poor Jeff to get caught. Back at home, he used his usual magic gestures in anticipation of Jeff's call. As expected, Jeff quickly called.
Hello?
Hey, Dad. It's me. It's Jeff.
Jeff, what time is it? Are you okay?
Yeah, no, not really. Dad, I got arrested.
Oh, no. What for? Jeffy.
Together, they flawlessly proved over the phone that Jeff hadn't committed any burglary. Gene assured Jeff that he would pick him up the next day and told him not to worry, promising to get him the best defense in the world. This was the confidence of Saul Goodman. Gene immediately called Jeff's mother, knowing that Marion needed to go to the police station. However, when Gene arrived at Jeff's house, Marion didn't hear the doorbell. Wearing headphones and surfing the internet, Marion didn't hear the knocking, so Gene had to enter through the unlocked back door. Marion's panicked reaction made Gene sense something was wrong. He told her to quickly change clothes and get ready to leave. However, Marion suddenly changed her mind and wanted Gene to go alone. At that moment, Gene faintly heard sirens through her computer headphones. When he checked the computer, he saw an old Saul Goodman commercial. Gene denied that the person in the ad was him. Marion may be older, but at least she's not demented. Gene guessed that Jeff must have told his mom about his identity, but Marion explained she just searched Con Man and Albuquerque online, and the Better Call Saul ad popped up. Ironically, Gene was the one who had taught Marion how to use the internet. Marion plugged the computer's internet cable into the phone, ready to call the police, but Gene violently yanked the cable out. Gene told her Jeff was in trouble and that he was trying to help him, insisting that he needed Marion's cooperation. While explaining, Gene continued to hold the cable. Seeing Marion's terrified expression, Gene put the cable down, telling her not to cause trouble, but Marion had already pulled out her emergency alert necklace. Gene threatened Marion not to call for help and snatched the device from her. At this moment, Marion felt utterly desperate and said something.
I trusted you.
This statement awakened Gene's inner conscience, and he put the alert device down. Marion resolutely activated the alert device.
Life alert.
Walter, are you okay?
No, Valerie, I'm not okay. There's a criminal standing in my kitchen threatening me. He's a wanted man, and his name is Saul Goodman.
All right, Marion, I'm calling the police. I'm calling right now.
Realizing the severity of the situation, Gene knew he was in big trouble and fled immediately. The highly anticipated finale of the classic American TV show Better Call Saul is finally here. Don't miss it! This episode not only features many important characters but also marks the most significant moment of the entire series. With the arrest of the main character, Saul, the decade-long Breaking Bad universe series has finally come to a satisfying conclusion. Picking up from the last episode, Saul hears the alarm and starts running frantically. Marion provides the police with crucial information about the vehicle. Back at home, Saul hastily gathers his valuables and grabs a disposable phone. To Saul's surprise, the police arrive much faster than he expected. Helpless, he escapes through the back window. However, he doesn't get far before he hears the sound of a helicopter overhead. It seems the police are taking the hunt for Saul very seriously. To avoid being spotted, Saul sprints towards the underground tunnel, barely escaping. Just when he thought he'd got away with it, he didn't realize that the next corner was full of police. So he rushed back, but before he can take more than a few steps, he sees a police car parked ahead. In a panic, Saul hides in a nearby trash bin. This is the second time he is hidden in a trash bin. The first time was years ago when he was searching for evidence in the Sandpiper Crossing case. He opens his little treasure box, which contains the contact information of a getaway company and some diamonds. This scene was shown the last time Saul planned to run away. Displaying his portable valuable assets, he takes out the disposable phone to contact Ed, but accidentally knocks over the box of diamonds while unpacking it. Now he has his work cut out for him, searching for tiny diamonds in a heap of trash, all in the dark. But before Saul could find a few diamonds, his worst fears were realized.
Hands, now!
Saul stands up from the trash bin, hands raised in surrender. In the next scene, Saul is brought to the police station. The Omaha police watch Saul's advertisements. Amazed that there was such a talent in Albuquerque, Saul was given the right to make one phone call. With no family to call, Saul first contacts his colleagues to ask them to request a long leave from his boss. In the cell, Saul can't believe this is real. He feels like he's dreaming. Feeling pain reminds him he's not dreaming. Just as he is in despair, Saul suddenly notices someone has carved "My lawyer will ream your ass" on the cell wall. It must be said that Saul's mind isn't as sharp as it used to be. He nearly forgot his old profession. Even criminals have the right to an attorney. So he quickly gets up, knocks on the door, and requests to make another phone call. The scene shifts to Albuquerque, where Bill receives a call from Saul.
William Oakley & Associates. Trust experience. Trust Oakley. Bill Oakley speaking.
Trust experience, trust Oakley. I like that. It's catchy. You know who this is, right?
As a lawyer, Bill is not allowed to conceal a call from a fugitive, but Saul assures him that he is already at the police station and there's no need to worry. Hearing that Saul has been arrested, Bill knows why Saul is calling him, but he doesn't want to take Saul's case because the prosecutor has a warehouse full of evidence against Saul. No lawyer could help him. However, Saul doesn't see it that way. He believes he will succeed, and this is Bill's chance to make a name for himself. Seeing Saul's confidence, Bill decides to trust him. On the way to the court hearing, Saul sees Marie, the widow of DEA Captain Hank, and Walter's sister-in-law from Breaking Bad. Those who haven't watched Breaking Bad should definitely watch it before Better Call Saul, as many plots are closely related. At the trial, the prosecutor announces dozens of charges against Saul, enough to imprison him for several lifetimes. Despite the prosecutor sentencing Saul to 30 years, he remains indifferent. He signals Marie to come in for a chat. Although Bill feels it's inappropriate, Saul insists, seemingly having a plan in mind. Marie enters, and everyone stands up to give her a seat. Seeing the accomplice responsible for her husband's death right in front of her, Marie controls her anger and accuses Saul of being capable of doing anything for money. She declares that such a person should be imprisoned forever and never be allowed to rise again. After Marie vents, Saul begins his performance. He admits Hank was a brave man, whom he admired, and expresses deep sorrow for Hank's sacrifice and Marie's plight. Saul also claims he is a victim. He recounts his first encounter with Walter. Walter, in order to save his captured subordinates, forced Saul to perjure himself. As a lawyer, Saul initially refused, adhering to his professional ethics. As a result, he was kidnapped by Walter and Jesse. taken to the desert with a grave dug, and had a gun pointed at his head. To save his life, he agreed to work for Walter. Later, it proved to be the right decision, as anyone who opposed Walter was killed. The best example is the simultaneous killing of 10 informants in 3 prisons within 2 minutes. Saul said he wasn't running from the police, but from people who wanted him dead. Although Walter is dead, his accomplice Jesse is still at large. Saul paints himself as a very pitiable figure, leaving Bill stunned at his storytelling skills. Prosecutor George believes the jury won't buy Saul's story, but Saul starts to threaten, noting that he's heard of George's winning streak, and trusting the jury now would be a gamble. This is Saul's leverage. He wants to negotiate for better terms. Hearing this, George's confidence wavers. Marie reminds him not to compromise with a criminal like Saul, but in the end, Marie leaves disappointed. After lengthy negotiations, Saul manages to secure only a 7.5-year sentence. Not only that, but Saul, knowing he has leverage, made a series of demands. He insisted on choosing his own prison because he knows which one is the most comfortable in the entire country. To maintain his winning streak, George reluctantly agrees to Saul's demands, but that's not enough. Saul further demands that the prison provide him with his favorite flavor of ice cream every week. Hearing this, Bill can't stand it anymore and tells George that Saul is joking. Under Saul's insistence, George agrees to the last request and prepares to leave. At that moment, Saul also revealed that he had an even bigger secret, one that had never been disclosed before. The prosecutor tells him to spill it. Saul's bargaining chip is Howard's murder case, which the prosecutors are already aware of. After Saul's last phone call with Kim chose to redeem herself. She went to Albuquerque to confess to the prosecutors about Howard's case and personally informed Howard's wife, Cheryl. Even though Cheryl would probably take her to court, Kim didn't care. After all, it was too depressing to live with a human life on her back all day.
He thought he really had something.
Sounds like you and your ex aren't talking on a regular basis.
Kim Wexler walked into the Albuquerque DA's office last month. She spilled her guts about Howard Hamlin. On the record.
You got nothing left to sell. Last chance. Do we go to trial or do we have a deal?
Yes, we have a deal.
Let's get this in writing. Not a word changes.
On the plane back to Albuquerque, Saul asks Bill what the DA is going to do with Kim, who confessed. Bill says that due to insufficient evidence, the prosecutors might put the case aside. Hearing this, Saul feels relieved. Although he has parted ways with Kim, he still cares about her situation. However, Bill points out that Kim's trouble doesn't lie with the district attorney but with Howard's widow, Cheryl. From what he knows, Cheryl is preparing to hire a lawyer to sue Kim. Hearing this, Saul reveals that he has more undisclosed secrets about the matter and that he will testify in court as soon as he gets off the plane. Bill thinks this might be detrimental to Kim.
You give the government more, maybe they bring the hammer down. What more are you gonna get? What's left?
You don't understand. It's really good ice cream.
Albuquerque's district attorney, Suzanne, learns that Saul is going to testify about Howard's case. After careful consideration, she immediately calls Kim, as this could reopen the case. Kim, upon hearing this, becomes a bit flustered. She decides to attend the hearing. Saul, dressed in a luxurious suit, walked into the courtroom with a calm and confident demeanor, clearly ready for what was to come. Saul requests to defend himself in court. He starts again with the story of Walter and Jesse kidnapping him, but this time his narrative is different. Saul admits that he was initially terrified but soon realized it was a money-making opportunity. Hearing this, Bill is shocked and requests a recess, which is denied. George, seeing the advantage for their side, asks Saul to continue. Bill requests to withdraw from the case but is again denied. Poor Bill just became cannon fodder for Saul's redemption.
I lied to the government about Kim Wexler. I fed him a load of BS about her involvement in Howard Hamlin's murder. I just wanted her to come here today. I wanted her to hear this. I didn't witness any of the murders, but I damn well knew what was happening. I was more than a willing participant. I was indispensable. I kept Walter White out of jail. I laundered his money, I lied for him, I conspired with him, and I made millions. And Agent Schrader and Agent Gomez and a whole lot of other people would still be alive. Fact is, Walter White couldn't have done it without me. You got that?
Bill hurriedly applies to have Saul's testimony struck from the record, arguing that it's speculative. George insists Saul continue because the information is unfavorable to Saul. After a heated debate, Judge Samantha allows Saul to proceed.
What happened to Howard Hamlin? It was... I can't even... After that, Kim had the guts to start over. She left town, but I'm the one who ran away.
This time, Jimmy finally tells the truth and reveals the deepest secret he had been hiding.
Charles McGill. You may have known him. He was an incredible lawyer. As the most brilliant guy I ever met, but he was limited. Instead, when I saw a chance to hurt him, I took it. I got his malpractice insurance canceled. I took away the one thing he lived for, the law. After that, he killed himself.
Remember Kim's shocked expression when Jimmy blamed Chuck's death on Howard? Now, Kim learns the truth. This is the Jimmy she had hoped to see, not the one who always chose to run away. The session continues with discussions between the judge and the lawyers. Jimmy, who has explained everything, makes eye contact with Kim. The Jimmy that Kim hoped to see has finally returned, and at this moment, she feels genuinely happy for him, just as she was happy for Jimmy when he first got his law license. In the series finale, the director includes 3 flashback scenes. The first is when Jimmy and Mike were escaping through the wilderness with $7 million. They were lucky to find a large water tank. Jimmy, parched and near dehydration, dives headfirst into it. Mike, experienced in survival, warns him not to drink so much at once, or he'll feel sick later. Jimmy hurriedly dumps out his homemade iced tea to fill his bottle with the precious water. The two rest by the tank to regain their strength. Jimmy is always the one who likes to break the silence. He turns to Mike and says, "We're sitting on $7 million here. How about we split it in half and run?" But Mike, always principled, is unmoved. He knows the consequences better than Jimmy. At this point, Jimmy starts to fantasize. He wants to spend $6 million to build a time machine and travel back to the past. He asks Mike what he would most like to do. Mike thinks Jimmy is talking nonsense and being unrealistic, but then Mike decides that since it's all hypothetical anyway, he might as well indulge Jimmy and discuss it. Mike says he'd want to go back to December 8, 2001, the day his son was murdered. Quickly, he changes his mind and says he'd go back to March 7, 1984, the day he first took a bribe as a cop. This was the first step on his path of no return, and the root cause of his son's murder. Mike also wishes he could travel 5 to 10 years into the future to see if his family is living well. Then he asks Jimmy. However, Jimmy's answer is very simple. He wants to travel back in time to buy stock in the companies that have seen the greatest increases in value, so he can become a billionaire. Mike thinks Jimmy is too focused on money and asks if there isn't anything else he'd want to change that's not related to money. Of course, Jimmy has regrets and things he wishes to change, like betraying his brother, but he doesn't say this aloud and chooses to avoid the issue instead. The second flashback is just before Jimmy runs away. When he's with Walter, he asks Walter the same question about time travel, but Walter dismisses the question as unrealistic, saying it violates the second law of thermodynamics. Hearing this, Saul counters Walter with a TV show he watched about quantum mechanics, insisting Walter answer what he would do if he had a time machine. Walter seems to understand Saul's point. Reflecting on his life, Walter acknowledges many regrets, but the one he regrets the most is walking away from Gray Matter, the company he co-founded. If he hadn't foolishly left, he wouldn't be in this mess now. Learning about Walter's experience, Saul's professional instincts kick in, and he scolds Walter for not mentioning it sooner, feeling he missed out on a good case. However, Walter's next words leave Saul feeling awkward.
You'd have been the last lawyer I'd have gone to.
Yeah, sure.
Walter says it's Saul's turn to share his regrets. Saul hesitates for a long time without speaking, and Walter doesn't press him. When Walter was about to leave, Saul casually said one thing, that is, when he was 22 years old, he faked a fall and touched the porcelain and ended up hurting his knee, which also led to Saul's current disease. This explains why Saul often mentions his bad knees when kneeling.
So you were always like this?
Walter succinctly points out Saul's fundamental problem. The third flashback shows Jimmy taking meticulous care of Chuck when he first developed electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Chuck sees and feels the brotherly love in Jimmy's care. Knowing Jimmy's character well, Chuck believes the legal profession isn't suitable for Jimmy. Chuck wants to guide Jimmy into a different career, but Jimmy always avoids the topic. By the end, we understand that Chuck was always Jimmy's guiding light, but Jimmy never took his brother's advice seriously. When they first had a falling out, Chuck said that Jimmy practicing law was like a chimp with a machine gun. After becoming Saul, Jimmy indeed acted exactly as his brother had predicted. Fortunately, under Kim's influence, Saul ultimately faces reality bravely and stops running away. This quality of courageously facing reality is the most admirable trait in everyone. Just like Walter eventually admitted that his pursuit of art was entirely to satisfy his own selfish desires. The earlier a person can confront their own issues, the more they can avoid tragedy. Jimmy recovered his former self and buried the false personalities of Saul and Jean. On the way to prison, a fellow inmate recognizes Saul, but he insists that he is Jimmy McGill. Because of Saul's notoriety, everyone in the criminal world knows of him.
See? Told you. It's Better Call Saul.
All right. Better Call Saul. Yeah. Better Call Saul.
Daddy, shut up! Call Saul! I said shut up! Call Saul! Shut the hell up! Call Saul! Better Call Saul! Better Call Saul!
In prison, Jimmy's experience in baking lands him a job in the kitchen making bread. One day, a guard tells Jimmy that a lawyer has come to see him, and to his surprise, it's Kim. Jimmy is astonished that Kim is practicing law again. Kim explains that her law license never had an expiration date. She checks the surroundings to ensure they're alone, then pulls out a cigarette and lights it for Jimmy. They share the cigarette just like they used to in the HHM parking garage, signaling a return to their old rapport. From their conversation, we learn that Jimmy could have accepted the 7-year plea deal he negotiated but chose an 86-year sentence instead, demonstrating his commitment to redemption. However, with good behavior, he might get a reduced sentence. Kim smiles knowingly, believing that Jimmy will indeed have his sentence reduced. Seeing this familiar scene again feels as if our lives have come full circle, returning to where we started. True growth is not about relentlessly pursuing one's desires but about doing anything for the people you love and those who love you. As Kim leaves, Jimmy goes to the yard to say goodbye. Although the prison bars separate them into different worlds, nothing can break their emotional bond. In the end, Jimmy didn't let Kim down. His confession is not only a redemption for himself but also the best response he could give to Kim. Although Better Call Saul has ended, its value to the audience will undoubtedly continue. We also hope that the creators can produce more masterpieces because Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul were truly outstanding and captivating.